Or Jan Logie.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. The Green Party is pleased to support the Veteran Support Bill. It is a piece of legislation steeped in symbolic meaning and practical importance for the 40,000 veterans with qualifying service and their families. People who have been waiting 7 years since this law was first referred to the Law Commission for resolution, and I am exceedingly thankful that it is passing in this term of Parliament. The world and our understandings of harm and the possibilities of rehabilitation have changed dramatically, as has the nature of warfare since the original 1954 Act was passed. An update is clearly overdue, and it is time to allow families certainty to be able to move forward. This bill will make changes to the administration and decision-making processes, hopefully making them easier for veterans. It will provide a greater focus on rehabilitation and enable the provision of services to better meet the needs of elderly veterans, as well as those of contemporary and future deployments. Changes have been made to this legislation through the Select Committee, thanks to the work of Greens and Labour, and received by Government. And post-Select Committee, I would offer my thanks to the Māori Party, who have negotiated, I think, quite fiercely to get small further changes to this bill that are important changes. And sadly, the changes haven't quite gone all the way. And I must say I still fail to understand the apparent meanness of the government on holding out on such a small financial contribution to ensure all veterans are entitled to all entitlements or their families. I really did feel that the mood in the Select Committee was one of commonality of concern, and yet sadly still we haven't been able to deliver on all of the 170 recommendations from the Law Commission or everything the submitters requested of us. Now, it is important for me, again on this, the day after the centenary of the start of the First World War, to take a moment to reflect on what those men, young and old, experienced at that time and remind us of our duty to do our absolute best to avoid sending any more men or women or people to war. And for me, no one has said it better than Wilfred Owen, describing the horrors in a way that I think helps some of us who are lucky enough to have only known peace to come close, or at least in some way imagine the lifetime costs borne by those fighting the wars created by people in places like this. And with risk of terrible schoolgirl recitation, I do want to read the poem from Wilfred Owen, because for me there has been no message or poem that's helped me understand it better than this one. So I beg patience of people. Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep, many had lost their boots, but limped on, blood-shod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas, gas, quick, boys. An ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling, and floundering like a man in fire or lime, dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea I saw him drowning. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his face, his hanging face like a devil's sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, bitter as the cud of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues. My friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est, pro patria mori. For those of you who do not know this poem or your Latin, this last phrase translates as, "It is sweet and right to die for your country."
Who wrote this?
And it was written by Wilfred Owen, is the version I know. We need to again acknowledge those conscientious objectors in the First World War who were kidnapped by the state and sent away for that old lie. And tragically, we still all too often hear this or versions of this used to sell populations on the need for war. We see it in Gaza, we see it in the Ukraine, and we don't see it so much, but it is continuing in Syria. And many of us watch these images and read these stories with a degree of horror, those of us who don't have family there, with incomprehension and pain for the ordinary people there. And I think obviously that is right. But we also need to remember that many of the soldiers too are not there by choice. They are there because of the will and the power of the leaders who do not have their bodies on the line. It is a tragedy, a failure of humanity and a corruption of politics for anyone to have to die or indeed kill for their country. This failure must be avoided at all costs. We must stand up for human rights, work for peace, and honour those in our armed forces for their will to work for a safe world without war. Soldiers are real people, members of our communities and our families, as well as being in our armed forces. And through the select committee process, we heard from submitters who have been in these conflict zones, who told us of their lives irrevocably changed by the war. And at times of that, we heard from children and where those war zones had been brought home and into their family lounges, and that the harm passed on to the next generation because the rehabilitation and the support services were not provided by the state to ensure healing. And we also heard of years of battles to get help and of struggles for recognition, battles and struggles with the same state that sent these people into places that caused them so much harm. You do not have to believe in war to want the best support for people who have been through such horror, which is why the Green Party has been disappointed that this government has held off on the two relatively small remaining points of the payment on death and the portability. We would like to have seen everything that the veterans asked for delivered on. We mourn the need, but wholeheartedly support this bill as the least our country can do to acknowledge the cost of being asked to kill another and putting your life and body on the line.
I call Mike Sabin.
Sir, the reality is that in the world that we live in, and the